Thank you. I rise today to announce an action to address an injustice carried out on this very floor that Congress has never atoned for, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. A century ago, the Chinese came here in search of a better life, but they faced harsh conditions, particularly in the halls of Congress. Congress passed numerous laws to restrict Chinese Americans, starting from the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, to stop the Chinese from immigrating, from becoming naturalized citizens, and from ever having the right to vote. These were the only such laws to target a specific ethnic group. The Chinese were the only residents that had to carry papers on them at all times. They were often harassed and detained. If they couldn't produce the proper documents, authorities threw them into prison or out of the country, regardless of their citizenship status. Political cartoons and hateful banners like these were hung in towns and cities and printed in papers. At the time of this hateful law, the Chinese were called racial slurs, were spat in the streets, and even brutally murdered. Only after China became an ally of the U.S. in World War II was this law repealed in 1943, 60 years after its passage. It has never been formally acknowledged by Congress as incompatible with America's founding principles. That is why, as the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress, and whose grandfather was a victim of this law, I stand on the very floor where the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed and announce that I have introduced a resolution calling for a formal acknowledgement and expression of regret for the Chinese exclusion laws. When the exclusion laws were first introduced, there was a great deal of debate in Congress over their merits. The U.S. had just abolished slavery. The 14th and 15th Amendment had recently been ratified. Slavery had been defeated, and freedom seemed more certain. The national atmosphere led many in Congress to stand up against the discriminatory anti-Chinese laws. But over the years, those standing for justice almost all disappeared. By the time 1882 came around, members of Congress were fighting over who deserved the most credit for getting the most discriminatory laws passed and standing against the Mongolian horde. Representative Albert Shelby Willis from Kentucky pushed relentlessly for the exclusion laws, lambasting the Chinese. Standing in the same spot where I am now, he said the Chinese were an invading race and called them aliens with sordid and unrepublican habits. He declared the U.S. was cursed with the evils of Chinese immigration and that they disturbed the peace and order of society. But there were a brave few, a small minority, who fought hard against prejudice and for principles of freedom. One such man was Senator George Frisbee Hoare, whose statue now stands proudly in the Capitol. He stood up to all of the Chinese exclusion laws and voted against each. He would say in 1904, when the laws were made permanent, "I cannot agree with the principle that this legislation or any legislation on the subject rests. All races, all colors, all nationalities contain persons entitled to be recognized everywhere as equals of other men. I am bound to record my protest if I stand alone." And stand alone he did. The final vote against the Chinese in the Senate was 76-1. What Senator Hoare stood up for is what I am asking Congress to stand up for today, that all people, no matter the color of their skin or the nation of origin, are the equals of every other man or woman. America came to be what it is today through immigrants who came from all corners of the world. Chinese immigrants were amongst them. They sought a place to live that was founded upon liberty and equality. They came in search of the American dream, that if you worked hard, you could build a good life. It is why my grandfather came to the United States. But when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, the truths that this nation holds as self-evident, that all are endowed with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, were discounted by the very ones elected to uphold them. And so, for a generation of our ancestors like my grandfather, who were told for 6 decades by the U.S. government that the land of the free wasn't open to them, it is long past time that Congress officially and formally acknowledges these ugly laws that targeted Chinese immigrants and express sincere regret for these actions. With my resolution, Congress will acknowledge the injustice of the Chinese Exclusion Act, express regret for the lives it destroyed, and make sure that the prejudice that stained our nation is never repeated again.